Every spring, something extraordinary happens in the Bulgarian mountains that most people never notice. The forest itself begins to hum with an energy that's been sleeping through winter, and certain flowers bloom in patterns that seem almost intentional. This is the signature of the Samodivas, ancient woodland spirits whose yearly migration from the mythical village of Zmekovo creates a living calendar written in leaves and stone. Tonight, we'll trace their path through landscapes that pulse with quiet magic, learning to read the signs they leave behind. Deep in winter, when snow blankets the Pirin peaks, something waits in a place most maps will never show. Zmekovo exists in the spaces between valleys, where ancient dragon paths wind through stone and shadow. The village materializes only for those who belong there, its walls built from crystallized mist and roofed with woven starlight. Here, the Samodivas gather when frost claims the mountain meadows. They arrive in small groups throughout December, their white garments trailing through pathways that close behind them. The village welcomes them with hearths that burn without wood and springs that flow warm despite the bitter cold. Each dwelling adapts to its temporary resident, expanding rooms for those who prefer solitude, creating communal spaces for sisters who share their winter dreams. The name Zmekovo carries the echo of Zmoi, the wise dragons who once ruled these peaks. These ancient beings forged the first agreements with the forest spirits, offering sanctuary in exchange for guardianship of the mountain's deepest secrets. The dragons have long since retreated to deeper realms, but their protection remains woven into the village's foundations. Stone archways bear carved scales that shimmer with residual power, and certain doorways open only for those the dragons once blessed. During these months of retreat, a profound silence settles across specific mountain regions. You can feel it if you know where to walk. The quiet goes beyond ordinary winter stillness. It carries weight, as if the forest draws breath and holds it, waiting for something essential to return. Even the wind moves differently here, careful not to disturb whatever sleeps beneath the snow. Local shepherds who have worked these mountains for generations notice the absence without understanding it. Springs that normally bubble energetically through winter flow with subdued murmurs. Certain clearings, usually alive with small movements and subtle sounds, become hollow spaces that seem to echo with their own emptiness. The shepherd's dogs avoid these areas entirely, preferring longer routes that take them around the quiet zones. In village taverns, old men speak of winters when the mountains felt fuller, though they struggle to explain what they mean. They remember childhoods when specific trails carried a different energy, when certain groves held warmth that defied the season's grip. Now those same places feel abandoned, as if something vital has been carefully removed and stored elsewhere. As February weakens into March, the first shifts begin. They start so subtly that only the most sensitive observers catch them. A particular quality enters the morning light as it touches certain snow-covered slopes. The air itself seems to warm by degrees too small to measure, yet somehow the forest notices. Ancient trees flex their branches just slightly, testing their strength after months of brittle cold. The mountain's energy changes in ways that defy easy description. Stone formations that have stood rigid through the harshest weather begin to emit the faintest vibrations. Underground streams, frozen or sluggish for months, develop new rhythms in their hidden courses. Even the snow responds, settling into different patterns that somehow seem more intentional, more purposeful. In Zmekovo, the Samodivas feel these shifts before they consciously recognize them. Their dreams grow restless with images of green shoots pushing through earth, of birdsong they haven't heard in months. Some wake to find flower petals on their pillows. though no blooms exist yet in the waking world. Others discover their hair has grown longer overnight, or that their skin carries new patterns of light beneath its surface. The question hangs in the warming air. What stirs first, the spirit or the forest that calls her home? Each seems to respond to signals the other hasn't yet sent. A Samodiva dreams of dancing in a particular meadow, while that same meadow begins to soften its soil without knowing why. Springs prepare to run clearer before anyone has asked them to change their course. The answer reveals itself in the forest's quiet preparations. Deep beneath the snow, root networks begin extending new connections. Pathways that disappeared under winter's weight start to reform stone by stone, as if the mountain remembers exactly where they belong. Certain trees develop subtle leans in their trunks, creating archways at the perfect height for graceful figures to pass beneath. The forest prepares clearings by allowing snow to melt in specific patterns, creating circles of revealed earth that will soon host midnight dances. Stream beds shift their contours to better reflect moonlight, while hidden springs adjust their flow to produce the musical tones that will guide wandering spirits home. Rock formations that seemed randomly scattered throughout winter reveal themselves as carefully placed stepping stones along ancient routes. The land itself becomes an invitation, written in thawed earth and strengthening breezes. Every clearing widens just enough to accommodate flowing white garments. Every stream clears its voice in preparation for songs it remembers from seasons past. The forest completes its welcome before the first Samodiva even stirs from her winter rest. And then, in the earliest hours of a March morning, when the mist carries unusual warmth, the mountain streams begin to sing with voices that sound almost, but not quite, like ordinary water. Listen carefully to mountain streams in early March, and you might hear something that doesn't quite sound like ordinary water. The difference starts small, like a single note that holds just a moment longer than it should. Then another joins it, and another, until the familiar rush and tumble of flowing water begins to carry something closer to melody. The transformation begins in the highest reaches of the Pirin Mountains, where winter's grip loosens first. Here, snowmelt feeds into ancient stream beds that have channeled water for thousands of years. But now these streams carry more than just melted ice and mountain runoff. They pulse with rhythms that seem almost deliberate, as if the water itself has developed intention. The sound shifts from the random chaos of liquid finding its path to something that resembles music, played on instruments made of stone and current. In the Vitosha Range, certain springs that have run clear and cold for generations suddenly develop new qualities in their voice. The water still flows at the same rate, still maintains its crystal clarity, but listeners report hearing harmonies within the bubbling that weren't there during winter's silence. Local villagers who have drawn from these springs their entire lives notice the change immediately. The sound carries further now, echoing off rock faces with notes that seem to answer each other across the valleys. The Rila Mountains contribute their own chorus, as streams that have been frozen or barely trickling through the coldest months begin to sing with renewed vigor. These waters flow through landscapes that have hosted Samodiva dances for centuries, and they remember the music that once accompanied those midnight celebrations. Now they practice those half-forgotten melodies, warming up their voices like singers preparing for a long-awaited performance. Ancient Bulgarian shepherds and farmers developed an ear for these changes over countless generations. They learned to distinguish between ordinary spring runoff and the water that carried something more. When streams began to harmonize instead of simply flow, When wells started producing sounds that reminded listeners of distant flutes, the people knew that winter's hold was truly breaking. These acoustic shifts served as nature's calendar, marking the precise moment when the world prepared to welcome back its dancing spirits. The mystery deepens when you follow these musical waterways to their sources. Wells that have run with predictable consistency for decades suddenly change their patterns. Some flow faster, as if eager to reach their destinations. Others develop new bubbling rhythms that seem to pulse in time with a heartbeat only the water can hear. Springs that normally produce steady, even flows begin to vary their output, creating natural percussion as water strikes stone in increasingly complex patterns. The strangest changes occur in places where multiple water sources converge. At these meeting points, streams that each carry their own distinct musical signature blend their voices into harmonies that sound almost too intentional to be natural. The water seems to negotiate its rhythms, finding common tempos and complementary tones that create something larger than the sum of their individual songs. This connection between Samodiva and flowing water runs deeper than mere coincidence. Water carries life through the landscape just as her dancing carries magical energy through the forest. Streams form the pathways she will follow when she fully awakens, connecting the hidden places where she rests to the clearings where she will dance. The water responds to her stirring presence because it serves as her guide and companion, the liquid roads that lead her home to the waking world. As March progresses, the musical quality in these mountain waters grows stronger and more distinct with each passing day. What begins as subtle variations in familiar sounds develops into clear melodies that seem to tell stories. Some streams sing with voices that sound almost like human laughter. Others produce tones that resemble wind instruments played by invisible musicians hidden in the rocks and roots along the banks. The changes spread downstream from the mountain sources, following ancient watersheds that connect high peaks to valley floors. Villages that sit along these water routes begin to report similar phenomena in their own wells and streams. The music travels with the current, carrying news of the awakening from the highest elevations down to settled areas where humans can witness the transformation firsthand. Local animals respond to these acoustic changes in ways that confirm something unusual is happening. Birds that normally avoid certain water sources during winter begin to gather near streams that sing with new voices. Deer and other forest creatures change their drinking patterns, seeking out springs that produce the most complex melodies. Even domestic animals show preferences for wells that have developed musical qualities, as if the sound of the water tells them something about its nature that humans can only guess at. The revelation comes when you realize that the water doesn't simply respond to the Samodiva's awakening. The streams and springs actively participate in calling her back from winter's retreat. They sing the songs she remembers from seasons past, playing melodies that remind her of meadows she danced in, clearings she blessed with her presence. The water becomes an invitation written in liquid music, a pathway of sound that leads directly from the hidden village where she rests to the forest that waits for her return. This water song grows stronger each day, echoing through mountain valleys and calling across distances that ordinary sound cannot travel, drawing her step by step toward the moment when she will finally emerge to answer its musical invitation. The first glimpse of white moving between dark tree trunks marks a moment the forest has been waiting for all winter. Through the early morning mist, something flows with too much purpose to be simple fog. The movement carries intention, a graceful progression that follows pathways invisible to human eyes. What might first appear as wisps of cloud caught between branches reveals itself as something far more deliberate when you watch long enough to see the patterns. Her emergence comes in stages, like a careful dance between visibility and concealment. One moment, the space between two ancient oaks holds only shifting vapor. The next, fabric rustles against bark with the softest whisper of contact. The white garments that mark a Samodiva's presence seem woven from moonbeams themselves, catching and reflecting light in ways that ordinary cloth never could. They move with her body, but also seem to have their own life, flowing around obstacles and through spaces that should be too narrow for passage. These robes hold power that goes far beyond their ethereal beauty. The white fabric serves as both her protection and her strength, woven with energies that connect her to the deepest forces of the natural world. Without these garments, her abilities fade like morning dew under harsh sunlight. The cloth forms part of her essence, as vital to her existence as breath is to mortal beings. She guards these robes with instinctive care, knowing that their loss would strip away everything that makes her who she is. Watch how her clothing interacts with the awakening forest around her. Branches that should catch and tear the flowing fabric instead bend gently aside, creating temporary doorways for her passage. The white material brushes against rough bark without snagging, leaves no threads behind on thorny bushes. Yet somehow, her passing leaves traces that the forest remembers. Certain trees begin to bud where the fabric touched their trunks. Moss takes on a different texture along the paths where her robes swept the ground. The morning light behaves differently in her presence, bending and flowing in patterns that seem to follow the movement of her garments. Sunbeams that normally fall in straight lines through forest canopy begin to curve and dance, creating pools of brilliance that shift and move with her steps. The white robes don't simply reflect this light, but seem to gather it, concentrating the illumination into soft halos that make the entire scene appear touched by magic. Her belt adds its own mystery to her appearance. Sometimes it shimmers with rainbow colors that shift through the spectrum as she moves. Other times it shows deep forest green, as if woven from living vines and leaves. This belt serves as more than decoration. It holds her robes in place during the wild spinning of her midnight dances, keeps her garments from hampering her movement when she needs to flee or fight. The colors that play across its surface reflect her mood and the season's progression, growing brighter as spring advances toward summer's peak. The most enchanting element of her appearance crowns her head in impossible beauty. Floral wreaths appear there, as if woven by invisible hands, created from blooms that shouldn't exist yet in the early spring forest. These are not flowers picked from established plants, but new blossoms that seem to grow directly from her hair. Violets unfurl their purple petals while still attached to her dark locks. Wild roses bloom in miniature, their stems somehow rooted in the elaborate braids that frame her face. These moments of visibility also mark her greatest vulnerability. When the morning light catches her white robes and reveals her presence to any who might be watching, she becomes both most beautiful and most exposed. The same garments that grant her power also make her unmistakable against the dark forest backdrop. She must balance her need to move through the world with the constant awareness that discovery could bring danger. Men who glimpse her in these moments sometimes develop obsessions that drive them to hunt through the forest for weeks, seeking another sight of that flowing white figure. Yet this vulnerability coexists with incredible power. The garments that make her visible also enable abilities that transform everything around her. As she moves through the forest, her robes trail across sleeping plants and dormant seeds buried in the earth. The white fabric carries within it the concentrated essence of awakening, the power to call forth life from winter's grip. The transformation begins wherever her clothing touches the natural world. Branches that brush against her sleeves suddenly sprout new leaves. Flowers push up through soil where her robes swept across the ground. The white garments serve as conductors for the life force that flows through her, channeling that energy directly into the forest around her. She doesn't consciously will these changes, but simply carries spring's awakening within the very fibers of her clothing. Her passing creates a trail of premature blooms that marks every path she takes through the forest. Snowdrops appear in perfect lines along roots where her hem touched the earth. Crocuses push through patches of remaining snow exactly where her belt cast its colored shadows. These flowers bloom weeks ahead of their natural schedule, responding to the concentrated spring energy contained within her magical garments. Each awakened plant becomes a signpost for those who know how to read the forest's language, creating a map of her movements written in petals and new green leaves. Where her feet have touched the forest floor, certain plants begin to show properties that herbalists have treasured for centuries. These are not ordinary healing herbs that grow wild throughout the Bulgarian mountains. They carry concentrated medicinal power that exceeds anything found in nature's usual offerings. The plants absorb her energy through their roots, drawing strength directly from soil blessed by her presence. The challenge lies in finding these enhanced specimens. They don't appear randomly throughout the forest, but only along the exact paths where she has walked. A healer might search for weeks through seemingly identical woodland, gathering herbs that look promising, but lack the special potency that marks a Samodiva's influence. The difference becomes clear only when you learn to recognize the subtle signs of her passage. Euonymus alatus, known to village healers as winged spindle, takes on remarkable qualities when it grows in her footsteps. Normally, this shrub produces berries and bark with mild healing properties. But specimens that root in soil touched by her dancing feet develop compounds that can ease the deepest joint pain and reduce inflammation that resists all other treatments. The leaves of these blessed plants shimmer with an almost imperceptible silver sheen that distinguishes them from their ordinary cousins. The healing power concentrates most strongly in plants that grow where she has performed her midnight dances. Gentiana alba, the white gentian that blooms in mountain meadows, becomes something extraordinary when it emerges from earth where she has spun through her ritual circles. These flowers develop roots that penetrate deeper than normal, drawing nutrients from soil layers that her dancing has somehow awakened. The resulting medicine can treat stomach ailments and digestive troubles that have plagued patients for years without relief. Old stories speak of humans who gained legendary herbal knowledge by following Samodiva trails through the forest. These brave or foolish individuals would track the signs of her passage, marking locations where the most potent plants appeared. They learned to read the landscape like a map written in blooms and blessed bark. Some became renowned healers, sought out by people from villages across the mountains who had heard of their miraculous cures. One such tale tells of a young woman whose sick child drove her to desperate measures. She followed flower trails and silver-leafed plants deeper into the forest than anyone from her village had ever dared to go. For 3 nights, she tracked the Samodiva's path, gathering herbs that grew along the route. The medicines she prepared from these plants not only saved her child, but established her as the most skilled healer in her region. The timing of collection determines whether these plants retain their enhanced properties. Herbs gathered too early, before the Samodiva's energy has fully permeated their cellular structure, work no better than common specimens. Wait too long, and the concentrated healing power begins to fade as normal plant processes resume. The window of peak potency lasts only a few days after her passing, creating urgent pressure for anyone seeking these botanical treasures. Risk accompanies every attempt to harvest these medicinal gifts. Following a Samodiva's trail means venturing into territories where her presence lingers, where the very air carries traces of her supernatural energy. Humans who approach too close to her actual location face dangers that range from disorientation and exhaustion to complete enchantment that leaves them wandering the forest until they collapse from hunger and fatigue. The forest itself seems to protect her, creating obstacles for those who pursue healing herbs with greedy intentions. Paths that appeared clear suddenly become tangled with thorny undergrowth. Streams that were easily crossed earlier in the day swell with rushing water that blocks further progress. Some herb seekers report feeling watched from the shadows, sensing eyes that follow their movements through the trees. Yet the most successful healers learn to approach this botanical treasure hunt with respect rather than desperation. They leave small offerings at the base of trees where particularly potent plants grow. They whisper thanks to the forest spirits and take only what they truly need for healing purposes. These respectful gatherers often find their searches rewarded with discoveries of rare specimens that seem to appear exactly where they are most needed. The balance between gift and danger reflects her dual nature as both healer and potential destroyer. She possesses the power to cure ailments that defeat conventional medicine, but she also commands forces that can drive mortals to madness or death. The healing plants she cultivates serve as a bridge between these extremes, allowing humans to benefit from her supernatural abilities while maintaining safe distance from her more dangerous aspects. This careful cultivation reveals something profound about her relationship with the mortal world. The enhanced medicinal plants don't appear accidentally where she walks. She deliberately channels her energy into specific species, choosing herbs known for their healing properties and amplifying their natural gifts. The Samodiva creates these botanical treasures as intentional offerings to humans who approach the forest with genuine need and proper reverence. Her generosity in this realm makes the contrast with her nocturnal activities all the more striking, as the same hands that bless healing plants with concentrated medicinal power can weave dances that trap unwary humans in deadly enchantment. As night falls across the mountain clearings, the air itself begins to shimmer with an energy that makes even experienced woodsmen turn back. They feel it before they see anything unusual, a change in atmospheric pressure that seems to press against their skin. The temperature drops by several degrees in specific areas, creating pockets of cool air that swirl with no apparent wind to move them. Seasoned hunters who have spent decades in these forests recognize the signs and quietly retreat to safer ground. The transformation begins subtly as twilight deepens into full darkness. Moonlight that normally filters through tree branches in predictable patterns starts to bend and concentrate in unusual ways. Certain clearings receive more illumination than should be possible, as if the light itself gathers there with purpose. The grass in these spaces grows differently, forming perfect circles that remain visible even during daylight hours. Her music starts before she becomes visible, drifting through the forest like whispers carried on wind that touches nothing else. The melody begins with single notes played on instruments that no human hand has crafted. Flutes made from hollow reeds sing with voices too pure for earthly origin. Drums beat rhythms that match the pulse of sap rising in spring trees. The sound carries farther than physics should allow, reaching ears miles away from its source. The Horo circle dance that follows draws its power from movements passed down through generations of forest spirits. Her feet trace patterns in the earth that create geometric designs visible only from above. Each step lands precisely where ancient dancers have stepped before her, following choreography that predates human memory. The dance builds slowly, starting with simple steps that gradually increase in complexity and speed. Wildlife responds to these nocturnal performances with instinctive fear. Deer that normally graze peacefully in moonlit meadows flee at the first notes of her otherworldly music. Birds fall silent in their roosts, pressing themselves deeper into protective foliage. Even insects cease their chirping, creating an unnatural quiet that amplifies every sound she makes. The forest empties of its usual nighttime inhabitants, leaving only her voice and footsteps echoing through the darkness. The hypnotic pull of her dancing affects the physical world in ways that defy explanation. The very molecules in the air seem to vibrate in harmony with her movements. Atmospheric pressure fluctuates with each spin, creating subtle changes that sensitive individuals can feel as waves of dizziness or euphoria. The magnetic field in the area shifts slightly, causing compass needles to waver and spin when brought near her dancing ground. Any human unfortunate enough to witness these performances faces a terrible choice. The music compels listeners to join the dance, creating an overwhelming urge to step into her circle and match her movements. Those who resist feel physical pain that increases with each passing moment. Muscles cramp and joints ache as the body rebels against the mind's attempt to remain still. The only relief comes from surrendering to the dance's call. Humans who enter her circle discover that keeping pace with her supernatural stamina requires more strength than mortal bodies possess. She spins and leaps with tireless energy, her movements becoming faster and more intricate as the night progresses. Her human dance partners begin to falter within minutes, their breath coming in gasps as exhaustion sets in. Those who cannot maintain her rhythm collapse from overexertion, their hearts giving out under the impossible demands. The air itself changes during these midnight rituals. Temperature fluctuations create visible distortions, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Oxygen levels seem to decrease in some areas while becoming more concentrated in others. Humans who survive exposure report feeling lightheaded and disoriented, as if the atmosphere had been altered at a molecular level. Some describe breathing that felt thick and heavy, while others gasped for air that seemed too thin to sustain life. Her motivation for these nightly performances remains mysterious to outside observers. She shows no obvious signs of fatigue or reluctance, suggesting that the dances fulfill some deep need within her nature. Some nights she appears joyful, laughing as she spins through complex patterns. Other times her expression carries solemnity, as if performing duties that weigh heavily on her spirit. The emotional tone varies, but the compulsion to dance remains constant. The ritual aspect of these performances becomes clear to those who study her patterns over time. She visits specific clearings on particular nights, following a schedule that corresponds to lunar phases and seasonal changes. Certain dances occur only during the new moon, while others require the full moon's brightest light. The movements themselves follow traditional patterns that serve purposes beyond mere entertainment or self-expression. These nocturnal ceremonies actually function as essential maintenance for the forest's magical ecosystem. Her dancing channels supernatural energy through the landscape, renewing protective barriers that shield the woodland from harmful influences. The geometric patterns her feet trace in the earth create focal points where natural and supernatural forces can merge safely. Without these regular rituals, the delicate balance between worlds would gradually deteriorate. The power generated during these midnight performances radiates outward from each dancing ground, influencing weather patterns, plant growth, and animal behavior across vast areas of the surrounding landscape. Walk through a woodland where a Samodiva has made her home, and you'll notice something subtle but unmistakable about the very atmosphere. The air feels different against your skin, carrying a quality that experienced forest walkers recognize immediately. It holds more moisture than weather conditions should allow, creating a softness that seems to caress rather than simply surround you. Each breath draws in oxygen that tastes cleaner, sharper, as if filtered through processes that exist nowhere else in nature. The mystery deepens when you compare these enchanted woodlands to ordinary forests just miles away. Two groves might share identical soil conditions, receive the same rainfall, and host similar plant species. Yet one pulses with vitality, while the other feels merely alive. The difference lies not in what you can measure with instruments, but in something more fundamental that changes how the entire ecosystem functions together. Light behaves strangely in territories claimed by forest spirits. Sunbeams that pierce the canopy seem to linger longer before fading into shadow. The quality of illumination appears richer, more golden, even on overcast days when neighboring forests remain dim and gray. Shadows fall differently too, creating patterns that seem almost intentional rather than random effects of leaf and branch placement. Morning mist clings to these special groves well past the hour when it should have burned away. Sound travels through these transformed environments, following rules that don't apply elsewhere. Conversations carry farther than they should, while footsteps on fallen leaves produce tones that ring like distant bells. The usual forest sounds blend into harmonies that approach actual music. Bird songs coordinate in ways that suggest conscious collaboration rather than coincidental timing. Even the rustle of wind through leaves creates rhythms that repeat with mathematical precision. Wildlife populations in these areas show behaviors that puzzle naturalists. Certain species gather in numbers far exceeding what the available resources should support. Deer graze peacefully in meadows that should accommodate half their number, yet somehow provide enough food for all. Songbirds build nests with unusual frequency, producing multiple broods per season when other areas see only single nesting attempts. Other creatures maintain careful distances from these supernatural territories. Predatory animals that normally hunt throughout the mountain forests avoid specific groves entirely, creating safe zones that herbivores seem to recognize instinctively. Bears and wolves alter their traditional routes to circle around certain clearings, though they show no signs of injury or illness that might explain their reluctance to enter. The seasonal progression reveals how her influence strengthens through the warmer months. Spring brings subtle changes that become more pronounced as summer approaches. Air quality improves steadily, reaching peak purity during June and July when her power reaches its annual maximum. Plants grow with unusual vigor, producing leaves that maintain their deep green color even during drought conditions that stress vegetation elsewhere. Temperature regulation in these areas defies normal weather patterns. Cool spots appear during the hottest summer days, offering relief that seems too localized to result from natural shade or elevation changes. These microclimates remain consistently comfortable while surrounding areas suffer from heat that drives both animals and humans to seek shelter. Summer's peak brings transformations that border on the miraculous. Flowers bloom in impossible profusion, creating displays that attract botanists from universities across Bulgaria. Some species produce blooms weeks ahead of schedule, while others extend their flowering periods far beyond normal durations. The air itself seems to shimmer during the hottest afternoons, creating visual effects that photographers struggle to capture on film. Mountain guides and longtime forest workers develop the ability to read these atmospheric signatures like a written language. They notice the specific quality of morning mist that indicates supernatural presence. They recognize the particular way shadows fall when magical forces are at work. Veteran hunters learn to identify the sound patterns that mark territories where forest spirits dance, avoiding these areas during certain lunar phases when human intrusion becomes dangerous. Local beekeepers report that their hives produce honey with unusual properties when placed near these enchanted groves. The honey carries flavors that don't correspond to any identifiable flower source, suggesting that bees gather nectar from blossoms that exist only under supernatural influence. Some villagers claim this honey possesses mild healing properties that help with respiratory ailments and digestive troubles. The explanation for these environmental transformations lies in her fundamental connection to life force itself. She doesn't simply inhabit the forest, but actively breathes vitality into every aspect of the ecosystem around her. Her presence functions like a living pump that draws energy from deep earth sources and circulates it through root systems, water tables, and atmospheric currents. Each breath she takes pulls in more than simple air. She absorbs ambient life force from her surroundings, processes it through her supernatural physiology, and exhales it back into the environment in concentrated form. This enriched energy spreads outward from her location, carried by wind patterns and underground water flows, until entire forest sections pulse with enhanced vitality. Her dancing amplifies this effect exponentially, generating energy surges that can influence square miles of landscape. The geometric patterns she traces channel this life force along specific pathways, creating networks that connect distant groves and meadows in a web of shared supernatural vitality. This concentrated life-giving power creates environments of stunning beauty and abundance that also carry very real dangers for unprepared visitors. Certain trails through the Bulgarian mountains seem to shift slightly each year, as if the land itself rearranges to welcome an old friend home. These changes occur so gradually that most hikers never notice them. A boulder that blocked a narrow passage last season now sits several feet to one side. A fallen log that once crossed a stream has moved upstream to create a better stepping stone. The adjustments appear natural, yet their timing suggests something more deliberate at work. The mountain landscape adapts to accommodate her seasonal movements in ways that defy simple explanation. Rocky outcroppings develop new ledges exactly where graceful feet need purchase during difficult climbs. Tree branches grow at angles that create natural handholds along steep sections. The earth itself seems to soften in certain places, making footsteps silent where noise might attract unwanted attention from humans below. These subtle transformations become visible when you know what to look for. Survey markers placed by government mapping teams shift positions between annual measurements. Official topographic maps require regular updates to account for changes that shouldn't occur in stable mountain terrain. Experienced guides notice that familiar landmarks appear in slightly different relationships to each other, as if the entire landscape participates in a slow, careful dance. Streams alter their courses with particular frequency along her traditional routes. Water that flowed on one side of a meadow for decades suddenly carves a new channel to the opposite edge. The changes provide better access to drinking water where she typically rests, or create musical sounds that harmonize with her midnight dances. These stream adjustments happen during spring floods when moving water has enough power to reshape the landscape. Yet the results serve purposes that seem too specific for random chance. Mountain clearings expand and contract based on her seasonal needs. Meadows that host her summer dances grow wider each year, as surrounding trees somehow fail to produce new growth that would encroach on the dancing space. Other clearings shrink when she abandons them for new locations, allowing forest to reclaim areas that once provided perfect circular stages for supernatural performances. The history of these pathways stretches back through countless generations of forest spirits. Archaeological evidence suggests that some routes have remained in continuous use for over 1,000 years. Stone markers carved with symbols that predate written Bulgarian appear along certain mountain passes. These ancient waypoints mark rest stops and dancing grounds that have served Samodivas since long before humans settled in the region. Local folklore preserves memories of how these trails developed over centuries of use. Village elders speak of paths that appeared overnight during their grandparents' time. They tell stories of boulders that moved to create new passages, of streams that changed course to follow more convenient routes. Each generation adds its own observations to the collective knowledge of how the landscape responds to supernatural presence. The mountains demonstrate an almost conscious ability to remember her patterns and prepare for her annual return. Rock formations begin subtle shifts during late winter, creating the stepping stones and resting places she will need when spring awakening draws her from the hidden village. Forest gaps widen incrementally, ensuring that her flowing garments won't catch on branches during her emergence from winter sleep. Bulgarian folklore recognizes deep connections between geological features and supernatural inhabitants. Mountains themselves possess spirits that cooperate with the forest beings who dance on their slopes. These ancient partnerships ensure that the landscape provides what its magical residents require. Stone spirits shift bedrock to create better drainage along dancing grounds. Forest spirits guide tree growth to frame clearings with natural beauty. Underground water systems respond to her presence with changes that surface dwellers rarely notice. Aquifers adjust their flow patterns to feed the springs and streams she depends on during her wanderings. Cave systems develop new connections that provide shelter during sudden storms. Even deep rock formations participate in these adjustments, creating the geological stability that supports centuries of repeated use. The idea that landscape lives and responds to the needs of its inhabitants runs through Bulgarian mountain culture, like underground water through limestone. Shepherds speak of valleys that change their weather patterns based on who travels through them. Hunters describe ridges that become easier or harder to climb, depending on their intentions. The concept of truly alive, responsive terrain feels natural to people who spend their lives in close contact with mountain environments. These pathways form an intricate network that connects all the sacred sites she visits during her active season. The routes link dancing grounds to healing springs, connect mountain peaks where she performs sky ceremonies to valley floors where she gathers medicinal plants. Each path serves multiple purposes, providing not just transportation, but also energy conduits that channel supernatural forces between important locations. The network extends far beyond what any individual Samodiva could travel in a single season. Routes connect territories used by different forest spirits, creating a web of supernatural highways that spans entire mountain ranges. These interconnected pathways allow for communication and coordination between spirits who might otherwise remain isolated in their separate domains. As autumn approaches and her active season draws to a close, these ancient pathways guide her movements toward the routes that lead back to winter sanctuary, following roads written in stone and stream that remember exactly where she needs to go. As autumn mist begins to gather in the mountain valleys, something profound shifts in the rhythm of the forest. The change starts so quietly that only the most sensitive observers notice it at first. Morning dew lingers longer on spider webs stretched between branches. Evening shadows fall with different angles, creating patterns that seem less vibrant than they did just weeks before. The air itself carries a subtle heaviness, as if the atmosphere prepares to hold winter's coming weight. Her withdrawal begins with the smallest gestures. Dance circles that once appeared fresh each morning start to fade, their geometric patterns growing less distinct with each passing day. The grass in these sacred spaces slowly returns to ordinary green, losing the silver shimmer that marked supernatural influence. Clearings that hosted midnight ceremonies develop patches where flowers refuse to bloom, as if the earth slowly forgets the magic it once contained. The signs of her departure scatter across the landscape like fallen leaves. Springs that sang with musical voices throughout summer gradually return to ordinary bubbling sounds. Streams that flowed with unusual clarity begin to carry the normal sediment of autumn runoff. The water remembers her presence for a while, maintaining some of its enhanced properties, but eventually yields to seasonal changes that pull it back toward winter's subdued rhythms. Flowers that bloomed weeks ahead of schedule during her active season now fade with similar timing reversals. Blossoms that should persist well into October begin closing their petals in early September. The premature endings create gaps in the forest's color palette, leaving spaces where vibrant displays once drew admirers from distant villages. Each wilting flower marks another step in her gradual retreat from the waking world. The forest itself participates in this seasonal farewell, slowly releasing the heightened energy that made every grove pulse with supernatural vitality. Trees, chichas that grew with unusual vigor throughout summer begin to show normal signs of autumn preparation. Leaves change color at expected rates rather than the accelerated pace that marked her influence. Animal behaviors return to predictable patterns as the magnetic pull of her presence weakens with distance and time. The melancholy that accompanies this transition touches everyone who learned to recognize her influence. Mountain guides notice that certain trails feel ordinary again, lacking the special quality that made walking them feel like meditation. Beekeepers discover that their hives near enchanted groves produce normal honey, losing the unique flavors that commanded premium prices in village markets. The world becomes slightly less magical, though most people struggle to identify exactly what has changed. Yet this gradual fading also carries deep comfort in its promise of eventual return. The healing plants she cultivated throughout her active season retain their enhanced properties long after her departure. Dried herbs gathered from her pathways maintain their concentrated medicinal powers through the winter months. Village healers store these precious specimens carefully, knowing they must last until spring brings fresh opportunities to replenish their supplies. Local wildlife adapts to her absence with behaviors that suggest they understand the seasonal nature of her presence. Birds that gathered in unusual numbers around her favorite clearings begin their normal migration patterns. Deer return to traditional grazing areas they avoided during summer months. Even insects adjust their activities, resuming the ordinary patterns that her supernatural energy had temporarily disrupted. Her final journey back toward the hidden village of Zmekovo follows routes that have guided countless generations of forest spirits through this same transition. The ancient pathways seem to recognize the approaching end of another cycle, making subtle adjustments to ease her passage. Stones shift to create better footing along difficult sections. Stream crossings develop convenient shallow areas exactly where she needs them during her retreat. The landscape itself prepares for winter's protective silence with changes that mirror her withdrawal. Morning mist grows thicker, providing natural camouflage for her final movements through the forest. Tree branches develop new arrangements that create sheltered alcoves for rest during the long journey to winter sanctuary. Even the wind patterns adjust, creating calm corridors that allow for quiet travel without detection. Mountain temperatures begin their seasonal decline just as she completes her withdrawal, as if the weather waits for her departure before fully embracing winter's grip. The timing suggests coordination between natural forces and supernatural presence that operates on scales too large for human comprehension. Cold air masses gather strength as her warming influence fades, ensuring that winter will establish proper dominance once she reaches safety. The eternal nature of this cycle provides profound comfort to those who understand its significance. Each year brings the same pattern of awakening, activity, and retreat that has continued for countless centuries. This reliability offers reassurance that some forces in the world operate beyond human influence or interference. The ancient magic continues whether people notice it or not, following rhythms established long before recorded history began. Her successful return to Zemekovo completes another chapter in a story that will repeat next spring with subtle variations but fundamental consistency. The forest settles into winter dormancy, knowing that its guardian rests safely until the warming days of March call her back to begin the cycle once more. These timeless patterns connect us to something eternal and protective that flows beneath our everyday awareness. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let yourself feel the quiet pulse of these ancient rhythms that flow beneath our everyday world. Somewhere in the Bulgarian mountains, winter settles over hidden villages, while streams prepare their spring songs. The Samodiva rests now, but her cycle continues in ways we rarely notice. This magic operates whether we see it or not. Each season brings the same careful dance between spirit and forest, the same gentle awakening of healing plants, the same protective silence that guards winter's sleep. These patterns connect us to something eternal and protective that has watched over the world since long before we arrived.